If you've ever watched a father walk his daughter down the aisle and felt something you couldn't quite name, not sad exactly, not happy exactly, just the particular ache of a moment you can't stop from ending, Father of the Bride knew exactly what that felt like 30 years before you had to live it. It landed on December 20th, 1991, and for a certain generation, it never really left. It's the movie dads watch with daughters before the conversation they're not ready to have. The one brides queue up like a rite of passage. Steve Martin played George Banks, a perfectly decent man slowly destroyed by his own daughter's happiness. Diane Keaton played his wife Nina, watching it all with the serene tolerance of someone who saw it coming. Kimberly Williams played Annie in her film debut, and Martin Short played Franck Eggelhoffer, a wedding coordinator from no identifiable country on earth. Directed by Charles Shire, written by Shire and Nancy Myers, it cost $20 million and grossed $129 million worldwide. Then it just kept running on television, year after year, until it was as much a part of December as anything else. Today we're counting down 15 facts you didn't know about Father of the Bride, the actress who nearly fired herself over a kitchen appliance, the Disney executive who tried to veto the cast before filming started, and the couple who wrote a movie about the permanence of love and spent the next 8 years proving it wrong. Before we dive in, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into the films that shaped us. Let's get into the countdown with number 15. Number 15, the wedding satire that came true. George Banks's first line of narration tells you everything. A man slowly losing his mind over the cost of his daughter's wedding. The Banks wedding, 572 guests, $250 a head, a $68,000 dress, a $1,200 cake, 9 relatives flown in from Copenhagen. Totals just under $250,000. In 2024 dollars, that's over $530,000. In 1991, the average American wedding cost roughly $8,000. The Banks wedding was 30 times the national average. George's panic was funny because it was absurd. Rich people problems, scaled up for comic effect. Here's what nobody predicted. The average American wedding today costs $35,000, 4 times what it did when this film came out. The U.S. wedding industry is now worth $74 billion annually. Wedding planners have said for years that couples bring in images from this film and ask to replicate the details. The swans, the tented backyard, the whole aesthetic. George Banks stood in a grocery store having a breakdown over hot dog buns. Specifically the packaging ratio, 8 hot dogs, 12 buns, the injustice of it, got arrested, and was bailed out by his wife on condition he stop ruining things. He is the cautionary tale of the film. He is also, increasingly, the median American father of a bride. The movie didn't satirize a culture. It described one that was 3 decades from arriving. George Banks was right about everything. He was just 30 years early. Number 14. Tom Irish played the same character 41 years apart. In 1950, Tom Irish made his debut as Ben Banks, Elizabeth Taylor's brother, in the MGM original directed by Vincente Minnelli. He appeared in the sequel, Father's Little Dividend, in 1951, then built a modest career in westerns and television through the 50s and 60s. The Lone Ranger, The Cisco Kid, Sea Hunt. In 1991, the production called him back. Same character, same family. Now, Great Uncle Ben Banks, watching another generation of Banks women get married. And then he was done. His career begins with Spencer Tracy and Elizabeth Taylor in 1950. It ends with Steve Martin and Diane Keaton in 1991. Same name, same family, different actors in every other role. One constant. There is no other actor in Hollywood history whose entire legacy exists inside a single story, 41 years apart. He wasn't hired for nostalgia. He was Ben Banks in 1950, and he was Ben Banks in 1991. And between those 2 dates, he had an entire career that nobody talks about anymore, framed at either end by the same fictional family at the same fictional wedding. He passed away in 2010. His filmography begins and ends with the same 4 words, Father of the Bride. Number 13, George Banks, was named after 2 fathers who couldn't let go. The studio that made Mary Poppins in 1964 is the same studio that made Father of the Bride in 1991. Disney, and the father in Mary Poppins, the man so rigid and emotionally locked that it takes a magical stranger to crack him open before he loses his children, is named George Banks. Myers and Shire named their character after him, deliberately. His middle name, Stanley, is a tribute to Spencer Tracy's Stanley Banks from the 1950 original. So, the full name is a compound, Mary Poppins' father, who can't let go, plus the original film's father, who can't let go. The 1991 character's entire arc, resistance, chaos, surrender, buried in a name that sounds completely ordinary. Disney named a character after their own creation, in their own building, 27 years later, and never pointed it out once. Martin knew. He said he didn't try to imitate Tracy's performance. He considered it flawless. And you can't pay homage to flawless things without shrinking them. His own version of the character, he said, came down to one emotion, melancholy, the feeling where you can't yell and you can't cry and you just can't believe what's happening. The character didn't need to explain himself. It was all already in the name. Number 12, Maddie Banks. Grew up to win an Oscar. Kieran Culkin was 8 when Father of the Bride filmed. He'd made his debut the year before as Fuller McAllister, Macaulay's bedwetting cousin, in Home Alone. In this film, he plays Maddie Banks, whose most memorable contribution is pointing out that nobody wants the word pit on a wedding invitation. Here's what Maddie Banks grew up to become: the Primetime Emmy, 2 Golden Globes, the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, all for playing Roman Roy in Succession, a catastrophically dysfunction-coded rich kid spending 4 seasons discovering what it means to not be who your father needed you to be. In 2020, Culkin reunited with Steve Martin, Diane Keaton, Kimberly Williams Paisley, Martin Short, and George Newbern for the Father of the Bride Part 3 Zoom special, a short film for Netflix to raise money for charity during the pandemic. The franchise's most overlooked cast member turned out to be the one who kept the most going, Maddie Banks, Oscar winner, most decorated alumnus of the entire franchise. He spent most of this film as a kid who couldn't understand why adults made everything so complicated. Number 11. Frank was improvised from a real person. Short has said the written dialogue was mostly gibberish, placeholder text he built into character. The accent, by his own description, a complete mishmash, no consistency. Maybe he was from Poland, educated in England, visited Prague, made side trips to Yugoslavia. He turned a type into a person through sheer specificity of voice. Frank was based on an actual event planner, Kevin Lee. Lee's client list includes Jennifer Aniston, Brad Pitt, Barack Obama, Kim Kardashian, Oprah Winfrey, and the Academy Awards ceremony. He had planned at that level for years. Nobody told him. Not during production, not during release, not during the sequel. A producer eventually mentioned it at a social event years later. Lee's response, as he told Bravo TV's Daily Dish in 2016, "I was totally shocked. He captured my character so well, and I was overwhelmed. Officially, I am the Frank." The man who plans the Oscars found out he'd been played by Martin Short in a 1991 Disney comedy from a producer at a party a decade later. The most outlandishly fictional character in the film was the most accurate portrait in it. Its subject walked through decades of Hollywood events without knowing he had a doppelganger. Number 10. The role she didn't expect to win. Kimberly Williams was a 19-year-old Northwestern University sophomore in Evanston, Illinois. She heard about the open casting call in Chicago and went, not to get the part, but to see if she could navigate the L train for the first time. The audition was a useful excuse to leave campus. Phoebe Cates had been the first choice. Then she became pregnant. The Los Angeles Times reported the news 12 days before principal photography was scheduled to begin. 12 days. No replacement. No backup. The search extended nationwide, then to England. Over 500 women read for the role. Nancy Myers developed one specific question during that search. Are you close with your father? Most women said no, or not particularly. Williams said yes, immediately, without hesitation. That answer, not her 4 auditions, not her training, is reportedly what got her the part. The role of a lifetime, won partly on a transit experiment and partly on a genuine relationship with her dad. The first choice dropped out 12 days before filming. The replacement was thinking about the train. Number 9, the blender breakdown wasn't acting. The setup. Brian gives Annie a blender for their 8-month anniversary. She takes it as evidence he sees her as a future housewife. Her father finds her in tears. On her first film, playing opposite Steve Martin, watched by a full crew edging toward lunchtime, the tears wouldn't come. Williams wrote about it in a personal essay for ABC News in 2017. Martin went back to his mark maybe the 50th time. The effects person kept switching the rain on and off. Shire kept coming through the door with less to say each time. "Give me one more, booby," in a voice that had stopped being comforting. Then Williams thought, "I'm not cut out for this. I don't belong here. I am a terrible actress." That thought, not performed, actually believed, was devastating enough that she sobbed. One real take, tears from genuine despair about her own inadequacy, in the middle of a scene about a different kind of despair. The character's greatest fear and the actress's greatest fear landed at the same moment, in the same body. That's the take in the film. When Shire called cut, the entire crew applauded. He gave her a lollipop, and Steve Martin's parting wisdom: "Welcome to Hollywood. You're gonna need a good therapist." Number 8, Disney said no to Keaton. The directors fought back. The Good Mother, 1988, was a Disney film. It was also, by Keaton's own description, a big failure. Like big failure. Jeffrey Katzenberg, running Disney Studios, wasn't interested in a second run. When Myers and Shire brought her name forward, he pushed back. Keaton told film scouts in 1996, "Charles Shire and Nancy Myers had to beg to get me into Father of the Bride. When Charles and Nancy wanted me, Disney didn't want anything with me. They fought, they won." Father of the Bride grossed $129 million worldwide, Keaton's biggest hit in 4 years. The studio that had written her off was now running her performance in holiday rotation. In 1994, Katzenberg left Disney after a falling out with Michael Eisner over a promised promotion that never materialized. He sued Disney for $250 million. Eventually settled. Co-founded DreamWorks. The actress Katzenberg tried to block is the reason the film is remembered 30 years later. The executive who tried to block her is a footnote in someone else's legal filing. The studio that didn't want Keaton ended up with her performance as the warmest thing it released that decade. Replayed every holiday season well into the 2020s. Number 7, the plane ride that saved Father of the Bride. Shire told the Indie Film Hustle podcast in 2021 that when Martin called about the project, he hadn't seen the 1950 original, didn't know it existed. He and Myers flew to New York purely to meet Martin without reading anything first. Shire read the existing screenplay on the plane, the draft Martin himself had described as something he didn't love. Shire's word for it: awful. He landed, took the meeting, told Martin the script wasn't good enough, not a pass, a renegotiation. Martin asked Shire and Myers to fix it. They rewrote entirely, with Martin and Keaton in mind for every scene. The script they threw out was the document that had brought the project into existence. The script they wrote to replace it, from scratch, without having seen the original they were remaking, became the film. Martin eventually watched the 1950 version. He considered Tracy's performance flawless and consciously chose not to imitate it. What he wanted to play instead, he said, was that specific feeling. Watching something happen that you cannot stop and cannot fix. $129 million worldwide. A sequel. A franchise still running in 2024. All of it started with a director reading a bad script on a plane and deciding, when he landed, that the only way forward was to throw it out. Number 6. The flop that led Steve Martin to George Banks. Pennies from Heaven was Martin's attempt at serious drama. He watched the BBC original and called it the greatest thing I've ever seen. He spent months learning to tap dance, dyed his hair brown, played an unsympathetic, morally compromised salesman in 1930s Chicago. MGM spent $22 million. The film grossed roughly $9 million. Asked about the failure, Martin said the people who understood the film were wise and intelligent, and the people who didn't were, in his exact words, beneath contempt. By 1991, he was 45 and had decided something needed to change. "I'm not doing wild and crazy man with two brains comedy anymore. If I didn't change, I'd be an idiot. I'm not the same age I was. I'm wiser than I was. What he wanted was that specific texture of quiet despair, the feeling where you're watching something happen to your own life and there's nothing useful you can do about it. He played his actual age, his actual register, a man he finally understood. He found it at 45, playing a man who spends an entire film watching something happen to his family that he cannot stop, cannot fix, and cannot speed up. After 10 years of movies he couldn't stand to watch, he found the one character who felt exactly like what he was going through. Number 5. Annie Banks wasn't just a name. Annie Myers Shire was born July 12, 1980. The bride and father of the bride, Annie Banks. The film came out in 1991. The actual Annie was 11. In 1998, Myers wrote and directed The Parent Trap. The twins are named Hallie and Annie. Hallie Myers Shire was born in 1987. Annie Myers Shire was born in 1980. Myers put her daughters' names at the center of every family story she made. Both daughters appeared as extras across multiple productions. Both became filmmakers. Hallie wrote and directed Home Again in 2017, produced by her mother. Annie appeared in Baby Boom, Father of the Bride, The Parent Trap, and What Women Want, across 2 decades, in small roles. The baby for whom Baby Boom was dedicated in 1987 became an extra in Father of the Bride in 1991, and is now a filmmaker herself. The fictional Annie Banks she watched get married at age 11 shares her name, in a film her mother wrote, directed by the man she called Dad. And in 2012, the real Annie Myers Shire got married. The ceremony was held at her mother's house in Pacific Palisades, in the backyard. Annie Banks got married in the backyard in the film. Annie Myers Shire got married in the backyard in real life. Nancy Myers wrote a movie about a daughter's wedding. Then she stood in her own backyard and watched one. Number 4. The $100,000 rights deal that made $129 million. In 1986, Turner bought MGM's entire film library. He wasn't trying to be a movie studio. He wanted content for his cable networks. He got it, including the remake rights to Father of the Bride, which were now his to sell if he chose to. Producer Howard Rosenman wanted them. He spent 18 months in negotiations. Turner's condition: retain television broadcast rights to any remake. That single clause collapsed the first deal. TriStar Pictures came in to distribute, agreed to everything, then backed out the moment Turner's TV clause was confirmed as non-negotiable. Stalled. Rosenman kept going. Eventually, Disney's Touchstone came in, structured a cable arrangement that gave Turner what he needed, and Rosenman paid $100,000 to close it. $100,000. For remake rights that would yield $129 million in worldwide box office, plus a sequel, plus a franchise, plus a 2020 reunion, plus a 2022 remake, plus decades of television broadcast fees that Turner collected on his own networks. Here's the kicker. Turner kept his TV broadcast rights. The man whose one demand nearly derailed the project ended up showing the film constantly on his own networks for the next 3 decades. He fought for television rights to a movie, and won them. And then that movie became one of the most broadcast films in American television history. He got exactly what he asked for. Number 3. The couple who wrote George and Nina Didn't Last. Nancy Myers and Charles Shire wrote a film about a couple whose unshakable partnership is the calm center of everyone else's chaos. They divorced 8 years later. Nobody talks about what happened to each of them afterward. George and Nina Banks are the emotional architecture of Father of the Bride. The whole film works because of them, their warmth, their stability, the quiet dance in the living room after everyone else has gone. The marriage is the point. Myers and Shire had been together since 1976. They married in 1995, 4 years after this film, and separated in 1999. After the divorce, Shire directed 2 films, The Affair of the Necklace in 2001 and Alfie in 2004. Both underperformed, then effectively silence. He was gone by December 2024. Myers, directing solo for the first time, made What Women Want, Something's Gotta Give, The Holiday, It's Complicated, and The Intern, becoming one of the highest-grossing female directors in Hollywood history. The AFI catalog notes that after Private Benjamin's success in 1980, Myers and Shire moved to take full control of their projects, which meant Shire directed and Myers produced. For 15 years, she wrote the scripts and handed them to her husband to direct. Father of the Bride was the last. After the divorce, she took the wheel. George and Nina Banks waltz in the living room when the guests are gone, and you believe every second of it. The people who wrote that scene had split up by the time you were quoting it at your own wedding. Number 2. Both Father of the Bride. Love Story had a divorce behind it. Father of the Bride premiered May 18th, 1950. Elizabeth Taylor married Nicky Hilton on May 6th, 12 days before. MGM timed it precisely. The same costume designer who made Taylor's screen wedding gown made her actual wedding gown. The studio handpicked her bridesmaids from the contract players on the MGM payroll. The logic was airtight. Taylor played a bride on screen. Taylor was a bride in real life. The line between fiction and reality deliberately erased. What couldn't be scripted was what came after. Taylor and Hilton's marriage lasted 8 months. She filed for divorce in January 1951, citing what the legal documents called mental cruelty. Father's Little Dividend, the sequel about the young couple expecting a baby, came out in 1951 while Taylor's lawyers were still negotiating the settlement. A studio made a movie about the permanence and joy of marriage, used their star's real wedding as the promotion. And by the time the sequel celebrating that marriage hit theaters, the real marriage was over. 41 years later, Myers and Shire remade the same story of permanent love, married 4 years after their version came out, and divorced 4 years after that. Every version of this franchise has been made by people who couldn't hold on to what they were filming, and that brings us to number 1. Number 1. Steve Martin played fatherhood before he lived it. You have a little girl, an adorable little girl who looks up to you and adores you in a way you could never have imagined. I remember how her little hand used to fit inside mine. Steve Martin had no children when he filmed that. None. His first child was born in December 2012. He was 67 years old. Everything in that speech, the little hand, the panic when she wants you to drop her off a block before the movie theater, the feeling of being replaced, was imagined, constructed from observation and instinct, not memory. He was playing a man who was him in almost every other way. His age, his emotional register, his deliberate pivot away from the wild and crazy persona he'd decided was finished. What I'm personalizing is the melancholy. You just can't believe what's happening. I like to play it. After it came out, he said it was the first time he watched himself on screen and liked what he saw, not the performance, himself. The man who played the most convincing fictional father of his generation had to wait 21 more years to actually become one. His daughter was born in 2012. He was 67. He had no idea what he was talking about. He was completely right. And there you have it. 15 facts about Father of the Bride, a film about letting go, made almost entirely by people who couldn't manage it themselves. What stays with you? Tom Irish, who opened and closed his entire career inside the same fictional family. 41 years of Hollywood between the two weddings. Kimberly Williams, crying for real on take 50 because she'd convinced herself she'd already failed, and that being the take they used. Kieran Culkin, complaining about a seating chart at 8 years old, winning the Oscar at 42. Steve Martin delivering the most felt monologue about fatherhood in American comedy, and having no child to draw from when he wrote it. And Nancy Myers and Charles Shire, who scripted a marriage so solid it anchors the whole film. And then, 4 years after it came out, made it official, and 4 years after that, ended it. The couple who wrote the Banks' living room dance had separated before most of us had seen the film twice. What stayed is on screen. What didn't is not. Which fact hit hardest? The one that made you want to call your dad, or the one that made you look at your own wedding photos differently? Let us know in the comments, and tell us which film we should wade into next. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss the next one. Until next time.